So I'm going to have the challenge this morning of reading my presenter notes from the laptop and looking over here and making sure that I'm advancing this one and this one at the same time. So forgive me if I get a little confused. And if you find that I'm talking about the wrong slide, I'll ask Tessa to stand up because she's close and just wave. So this morning I'm here to talk about, it's not there, almost worked. Da-da-da-da. Parents. And I like to start with this picture because it's really dear to my heart. This is a family at Montessori in Redlands, California. And look at the dad and look at the little girl. This to me typifies what the inner parent is about. We talk about the inner child a lot, don't we? The inner parent, this guy has 3 children in the school at this point. 1 in elementary, 1 in children's house, and this little precious toddler. Montessori in Redlands is a big campus. It's 11 acres. It actually has to be connected by a bridge because it crosses an arroyo. He would park by his little toddler's class, but then they would walk the elementary child to his class, the children's house daughter to her class, so that they could go back and forth across the bridge and spend an extra half an hour every day starting the day. And this guy's a doctor. Okay, do you have any people who say they just kind of pass off their children to you because they're in a hurry? But this is the essential parent. And he'll be glad for the rest of his life that he did that, won't he? So I just like to remind us that that parent is there. That parent is inside there. Do you agree? And it's our job to find ways to touch that parent. So why is it so darn hard to get parents on board with Montessori? They didn't grow up in Montessori. Do you remember me talking yesterday about when I was a child, my mother said something to me and I promised in my own little head when I grew up, I was not going to say that to my children? And guess what happened when I grew up? Those words came out of my mouth. Our parents, very few of them went to Montessori as children, did they? So what they know best, what is most comfortable to them, is the conventional school that they grew up in. They also are stuck in a false paradigm of childhood. For the Congress in Portland 5 years ago, I went in the newspaper archives of the local newspaper and looked for comic strips about children. And this is typical of what you find. If you were from Mars and you came to the Earth and you tried to determine how people felt about children by looking at the comic strips or watching television, what you would think is that children are naturally messy, bored, lazy, noisy, uncooperative, difficult, and as this comic says, there's nothing to do with Katie's house, her cable TV and internet went out. Now, when we see that, we think, yes, the cable TV and internet went out. Now the children at last will be free to do the things they invent for themselves. And we know they have that capacity. But our parents are coming from this mass culture that looks at children in a completely erroneous way. Therefore, we'll need to help them disconnect from their conscious thinking, judging, criticizing mind if we're going to open them up to a new paradigm. The thing about a paradigm is it's not the world itself. It's sort of a map or an image of the world, right? And you don't even know you have it. So we're wasting our time. We're just talking at parents unless we can create an environment or an experience that really opens their mind up to what we're saying. Do you agree? To do that, we will need to include elements of surprise and direct experience and provide a deliberate contrast to their own educational experiences. What's more surprising than your first observation in a Montessori classroom? Do you all remember that? What did you see that stood out for you when you first observed in a Montessori classroom? Anybody?
Kids working all different things.
Kids working all different things.
Self-organized.
Self-organized.
Quiet.
The quiet. Number one answer, quiet. Not expected by the prejudices society has about children. What else? I'm old and hard of hearing. You have to speak up. Focus. Children of very young age being surprisingly focused. Anything else?
Collaboration.
Collaboration. So were all of these things surprising to you? Well, if you knew something about Montessori ahead of time, it probably wasn't a surprise. But for a parent coming in and seeing Montessori for the first time, it's breathtaking, isn't it? Who else was surprised? You might have heard of her. Look at what she says. It took time for me to convince myself that this was not an illusion. After each new experience proving such a truth, I said to myself, I won't believe yet. I'll believe it next time. Thus, for a long time, I remained incredulous and at the same time deeply stirred and trepidant. As a little aside, has anyone in this room ever heard of cold fusion? Vaguely? In 1989, two very famous chemists, physicists, made this extraordinary announcement. It seemed they had solved the energy crisis. They had conducted an experiment, and they seemed to have proved that you could create excess energy without a lot of external heat. Now, a fusion reaction is, we're talking the surface of the sun, right? Which is why we don't have fusion reactors powering our countries. But it seemed like they had found a way to do it, but cold. I apologize to those of you that heard me speak in St. Petersburg, because I already told this story there, but go along with me. So the reason why most of you have never heard this is because these were scientists. So when they published their paper, what did other scientists do? If there's a surprising result, other scientists will recreate the same conditions and see what happens. No one could recreate that same experimental result. Okay, this is what I want you to take away from today, if you take away nothing else. All right, Montessori is scientific. 100 and whatever years ago, she conducted a scientific experiment that had surprising results. Has that experiment been confirmed since then? Isn't it being confirmed in classrooms all over the world every single day with millions of children? So it's proved already. It's scientific. So don't be afraid to shout from the rafters, because we know what the heck we're doing, right? And doesn't that give you some power with those engineer dads? Anybody else have dads in your school who are engineers?
Moms too.
And moms too, right? And aren't they the hardest to reach, because they want to say, oh, this sounds all very good, but I want the proof. You've got your proof. How we're going to use observation is as a way to introduce parents to Montessori in the first place before they even apply to the school. Some people asked me yesterday, do you have, because we were talking about interviewing teachers and hiring teachers, and they were asking me if I couldn't come up with a set of behavioral interview questions for parents before we accepted them in the school. I don't know, like, tell me about a time when you acted with your child in a very Montessori way. We do have to have enrollment, after all, right? And our parents are starting on a journey with us. They don't come to us knowing about these things. So I insist at every school where I've worked, and it makes a huge difference, that parents actually observe before they can apply. Do any of the rest of you do this? Thank you. And both parents need to observe. Why do both parents need to observe? Yeah, they both need to be on board. And have you experienced this particular phenomenon where the child comes to your school for toddlers, and when they're 3, and when they're 4, and when they're 5, and then when they're 6, and it's real school, that's when Dad, in his benighted wisdom, steps in and says, oh, okay, now, I let you decide before that when your child, when our child was little, it didn't matter. But now, I want to make sure I'm getting my money's worth. I see by the nodding heads that some of you have heard those exact words. It includes observation at more than one level. Why would that be true? What am I indicating to this parent of a toddler if I have them observe in Children's House and elementary before their child has even started at 18 months? What's that telling them? There is a continuum. Is this a daycare center or is this a school? It's a school. And it's easy for them to accept it when their child is 18 months old. They're not being asked to make a commitment to come to elementary then. But it's like I'm planting that seed in their head already. And also, if a prospective parent only observes in toddlers, is there anything cuter on the face of the world than toddlers? Is there any person on this planet who can observe in a Montessori classroom of toddlers and not just smile? I've never seen a parent yet who can keep a straight face. So that's not a true test, is it? To everybody, the toddler environment looks like ponies romping in a meadow, because they're romping and pooping in a meadow. But then ponies do that too, don't they? So here's the important part.